So it's lovely to see everybody, lots of familiar faces, and I am so glad that we can gather here as a community, as our own virtual community for this week's Climate Week in New York City. Woohoo! It's been a really exciting week full of inspiring and informative events. And my goal here today is to share some of my learnings from this week and really from this learning journey that I've been on with B Lab. I'll tell you a little bit about it. There is a lot of information. I think here, these next 90 minutes will definitely allow us to get to know what we might not know and just be a little bit more open. You know, this idea of synchronicities, once you hear something, it begins to play more and more in your mind and become a part of you. And that's really what my goal is here, is to inspire some sort of action. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and Skopos.
My name is Ellie Papadopoulos, and I'm the founder of Skopos Collective.
Skopos is a Greek word that means purpose, and our name reflects an intentionality in our mission. We serve locally owned and mission-driven manufacturers, designers, creatives, foodies, retailers, mostly people that make things with their hands. And we help them to be more profitable, get control of their finances, live out their values, and have a little more fun. And I wanted to put this together for the same reason you guys are all here today, because we give a damn, right? And the thing is, we know that there's that million and one challenges to address, and it's not going to be easy, but it sure will be more impactful and fun if we're all doing it together and being consistent in our efforts. Lots of little wins equal big ones down the road, and all those little ones should be celebrated. So we are here to talk about climate finance, which is kind of like this subset of being a values-driven business. It's connected to being a sustainable business, but then financial governance is a subset of that. Who are our financial partners? How do we manage the treasury functions of our business? And that's where climate finance comes into play, which, if I was to sum it up in one word, it's the money that comes from government and the private sector towards positive climate and social action. This week, I heard a statistic that said that we need $5 trillion to move the needle closer to the goals set in the Paris Climate Accord. And the thing is that the money is there, right? Extractive industries get massive subsidies. I also heard somewhere that, collectively $11 trillion was spent on our COVID response. So it's not that the money isn't there, it's just that the political will isn't there. And that's where we come into play for an important upstream movement. Today, for our climate finance class, our 90-minute session, we're going to talk a little bit about, what climate finance is, how does it apply to your business, what can you do about it? I'm super excited to have a couple other esteemed business owners here on the call. We have Chelsea Minola of Grain and Seth Burroughs of United by Blue. They are both going to be sharing their story about how they took action and just kind of what's motivated them and what obstacles have they faced and the actions that they've taken in their own journey. Oh, the other thing I want to give a shout out to is B Lab. Chelsea and I, which is how we met, we're part of a B Lab climate finance cohort that spanned several weeks over the spring and summer. And both United by Blue and Grain are B certified companies. And these are companies that have changed their governance to commit to doing good by their workers, by their local communities, the greater environment, their customers, right? And you can actually go online and take this like B impact assessment. It's a free digital tool that helps you measure your impact across these 5 areas. And the thing is, you don't need to be certified, right? I just mentioned this as kind of as a governing body that sets standards, and there's other standards as well, as we'll talk about. But you don't need to be B certified to live out your missions. It's just that they help really gather the community to help us amplify the work that we all do collectively towards creating this world that we want to be in, right? By the end of these 90 minutes, I think there's going to be 2 pathways to action. The first path is you're going to keep on learning and defining what's important to you and exploring your options, because it's not just like a quick switch. Maybe it is for some, and that's great, but for others, it might not be. It might take some time, right? It depends on either how deep our relationships are or how transactional our relationships are, right? But if you're ready to take the pledge and make the switch, that is amazing as well. And we'd love to help you in that journey, to explore your considerations, and also to really the implementation side of it. You know, when you're switching banks, there's your backend systems, QuickBooks, you got to change your wire information, all that stuff. So let's mingle for a few minutes and get to know each other and have some fun. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of networking this week, and just because we're virtual doesn't mean that we can't network. So what I'd like you guys to do, I'm going to break you out. I'd like you to introduce yourself to your mini group, what you hope to learn today, what does being values driven look like for you, and what might that look like in practice. Sound good? Welcome back. All right. So everybody's on mute, but any inspirational, or anybody want to share some of that joy that you guys shared in your breakout rooms?
Something that I found very interesting was everybody in our breakout room had the same goal and the same desires. We were at different points in that process. And like people were acknowledging maybe how they were not contributing in the past and want to in the future. So we're all heading in the right direction, the same direction at our own paces, and we're at different points on that line. But I just love how it's this community moving forward, because sometimes it feels like nobody's doing anything. So it's nice to hear that everybody has the same drive.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Anybody else?
I think something we had in common in our group was that everyone has like a very personal relationship to like a space that's immediately accessible, and just having like the ability to get away or to have this kind of protected space.
Yeah. Cool. Just for me, the beach is, just share my own photo here. The beach is really important to me. This is a photo of a beach that we frequent in Greece. It's in northern Greece, so it's very green up there. They get a lot more rain. But in the past years, it's gotten extremely dry, very flammable. And the crazy thing about it is that the fires are widely known to be made by industry, to make room for things, because they are protected. So we've got, like 2% landmass just in 1 year that had been burned. And of course, that's creating, the hottest summers on record. And of course, there's this pollution from plastic. So that's something that I definitely want to see stay lovely and whole and natural and pristine. And the thing to change that really is business. When I started out in college, I was actually a poli-sci major. And I was like, I don't think we can change the world of politics. I'm going to try something with business. And in my very first business class in college, there's two fundamentals of business finance, and it's two tenets of US corporate law, which is business exists to maximize profit and business exists to maximize shareholder value. And of course, we know in the 80s, there was this, the saying on Wall Street, greed is good. And that hasn't necessarily done us very good now, decades later, right? There's been a lot of extraction of value, and these two business tenets of profitability have really wreaked havoc on us and our resources globally. And it makes it harder for us to enjoy nature, its resources, breathe clean air, swim in clean water, drink clean water. And I read this quote a while ago that businesses have an obligation to create more value than they capture. And this is going to be a long and hard effort, but I think it's important because we know what the benefits are of being a values-based business. And the thing is, now it's time to take our values and really make it part of our strategy, right? Like not only composting, but what's some other more impactful way where we could do things with our money? Like how is our money blocking us from truly living out our values? And how can we tear those barriers down? So to introduce climate finance, I want to play this video for you that in 90 seconds, it totally described what climate finance was. And I've been in, practicing business for over 20 years, over 25 years. And I didn't know this stuff. Like I knew our money was used for things, but I never really thought about it in this way. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video for you guys and let's get started.
One way to change the world is to change what we do with our money. At Matarin, we manage $700 million in assets. There is a system called the fractional reserve banking system, which says that banks only have to keep 10% of the money that we deposit with them in reserve. And with the rest of the money, the other 90%, that's what they use to make loans. They might lend to local businesses, they may make mortgages to some families, and they also might lend to fossil fuel companies. And so when you look at the types of loans that your bank is making, your money is an extension of you. We can divest from fossil fuel companies and invest in green energy companies. We have to choose what we do with our dollars. You have the power to change the world.
So as small business owners, how can we impact our own financial supply chain? And there's three parts of that. There's banking, which is going to be the primary focus of, of this session. But then there's also insurance because to build major, mining plants, they need major insurance policies because the likelihood of something happening on those plants is much, much higher than a regular development project. And then of course, our retirement plans fund things like, the prison industrial complex to other extractive industries. And as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on banking. There was this article in the New Yorker, and I love the question that it asks. It does say money is the oxygen on which the fire of global warming burns. And what if the banking, asset management, and insurance industries moved away from fossil fuels? And let's look at some of the numbers, some of the impacts that they have on us and our climate. Over the past 7 years, the world's 60 biggest banks have poured $5.5 trillion into extractive industries. So they are destroying land. They, there's obviously deadly health impacts. And you could read the entire report on bankingonclimatechaos.org. This is the record of the various banks out there. And I'm not saying this, to shame anyone, but I think it's important to know because knowledge equals action. And if they're going to change, we need to be able to push that change upstream. This was an interesting statistic from another wonderful report called the Carbon Bankroll 2.0. On average, banks' financed emissions are more than 700 times larger than their own emissions, right? So just by them lending, they're creating 700 times this negative effect than they create on their own, a negative effect, right? And that includes all the emissions generated by their branches, their servers, electronic banking. And I can imagine now with AI, it's even more, right? And that's where the good banks come into play. And we already know all these good banks, right? We grew up with them. I think our parents grew up with them as well. They were community banks. But these days, community banks have become a much larger and more synonymous, I think, with ethics and ethical practices. And an ethical bank or a good bank avoids financing industries like fossil fuels and weapons manufacturing. They don't fund destructive projects. They offer transparent services. I can't tell you how many businesses we work with that have, these opaque lending products that at the end of the day, they're just giving 100% APR interest to companies that don't value that relationship, right? And we want to invest in these kinds of relationships. Ethical banks are led by diverse teams, and oftentimes, not necessary, but oftentimes they do hold a social, environmental, or economic certification or designation, like the B Lab certification, CDFI, which stands for Community Development Finance Institutions, essentially nonprofit banks. And then there's also the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the important thing here is that when we look at these good banks or we look at anything that we do, it's important to think that, we're not just focused on one thing at the expense of, we're not focused on one value at the expense of another value. And a perfect quote that I heard earlier this week was, you can't solve hunger with slave labor, for example, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at things from a very holistic perspective. So I wanted to just share with you guys quickly some, climate-friendly banks out there, right? Some more socially sustainable banks as well. And just like dating, there are lots of different options to explore, and it really depends on what is right for you and your values and your business, but also what's right for the technical needs of the business, which I'll get into on the next slide. So these banks here, most of them serve New York State. So Amalgamated Bank has been around for over 100 years. It's gone through some rebranding, obviously, recently, but they're a highly eco-friendly bank with a wonderful B Lab rating. There's Carver Bank, which is a Black-owned bank. Climate First Bank is focused on climate, as the name suggests. All of those three serve New York State, as well as Atmos Financial. And by the way, I don't have any, affiliation with these folks, no fiduciary responsibility to them. Just want to mention that. Atmos Financial does not have any business banking products, but they have savings, right? So for me personally, on my journey, it was easy to take some of the funds that I had and move it over into Atmos for a really easy savings kind of switch, right? It's online. I didn't have to go into a bank, and it's pretty simple. And what Atmos does, their focus is on funding, I believe, green regenerative energy sources. So each bank kind of has their own mission. As I mentioned, Carver's a Black-owned bank, or Black-led bank, so their focus is serving marginalized populations. Beneficial State Bank is out west. They only serve California, Oregon, Washington State. Spring Bank, for those of you in New York, is up in the Bronx, and they're a lovely CDFI bank that really, really serves the need of underserved populations, both on a business and a personal front. And there's others, right? Mascoma, I think, is in New England, and City First Bank. They don't serve New York; they're out of DC, but it's another Black-owned bank that is focused on serving underserved populations. So, really depends on what you align with, but also, what are the services that you need specifically, right? So what are these things that you need to consider before you make a switch? First and foremost, do they serve your state? Are they FDIC insured? That's very important. What is their mission focus? If your business is focused on climate, then you probably want to have a banking partner who's focused on climate as well. The other thing, and this is an interesting one for a client that we're working right now on a loan, they can't really move right now because they need a loan from a bank, and some of the banks might not have those kinds of credit facilities. So got to weigh your options in terms of where you are right now in your business and maybe a little down the line. If you do need a loan in the future, a bank like Amalgamated has an SBA lending arm, but they mostly focus on their clientele. So it's important to start building those relationships and talking to them and understanding what your needs are, right? And that's the other nice thing, is that they're relationship based. And I'm really excited to hear Seth and Chelsea's experience with their bank partners as well. Zelle was an important one for me. Do they have Zelle? A lot of them have accelerated their adoption of technology, but it's still these kinds of banks are still young. Their assets are small, and they're operating like small businesses themselves sometimes. Do they do international transfers, right? So if you're heavy on international activity, you want to make sure that that's a box that you can check. Online check deposits. And of course, my favorite one is, especially if you have an operating account, do they connect seamlessly with your operating software like QuickBooks, right? Because that's going to be a whole world of pain if it doesn't and you have a lot of transactions. So is there anything on here you think that that you might need from your bank that is not listed here?
One of the things that I've heard as a concern from businesses when they're considering moving banks is how difficult or easy is that transfer of funds, like just that very mechanical, like, okay, all my money's here and now I want to move it over here. And I actually don't have experience doing that. I'm curious if you, Ellie, or anyone you know, or anyone in this Zoom room has any insight into that.
It's a good question. Let's log that, and then we'll definitely keep that for our esteemed panelists here. Yeah, that's a great question though. I never would have thought of that. I would think that somebody's willing to take your money, right?
Well, yeah, I can say one thing.
Yeah.
We have a client who tried to pay us via ACH through Amalgamated Bank just last week, and apparently Amalgamated Bank doesn't really do ACH transfers.
Oh, wow.
And it was a massive kind of endeavor to get this money over to us. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure how it resolved itself. I wasn't a part of it, but it was one of the things that the downside of these banks is the convenience factor and the immediacy that they offer, which is something that if you're used to that sort of service, it's going to be hard to kind of do your business without it.
Yes, I completely agree, especially ACH. I'm surprised about that. Okay, I wrote your questions down. We're going to kick off. I'm going to pass the mic over to Seth and Chelsea in a bit. I did want to mention, stemming out of the B-Lab Climate Finance cohort, this was their very first cohort, and they are continuing to grow the program, evolve it to further that impact. But on Monday, they will be releasing a guide called Your Business Finances and Climate Action. So it will have, much, much more information. So with that, I'd love to have Seth and Chelsea take the mic. Thank you so much for joining us. So Seth is from United by Blue. Chelsea is from Grain. If you guys could take a moment, starting with Chelsea, to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Grain and what values are important to you and your company.
Thank you for inviting me to join this today. My name is Chelsea Minola, and I have a design studio called Grain. We were founded in 2008, so we've been in business about 16 years. I work with my husband, and we met as students at the Rhode Island School of Design. And we make furniture, lighting, textiles, and other objects for the home. In the beginning, we were mostly working in wholesale, smaller objects, and now we work predominantly with the trade, so architects and interior designers. We also do licensed products for other producers as well. And we're based on Bainbridge Island in Washington State, which is across the Sound from Seattle. And we are a certified corp and a climate neutral business. And this whole area of climate friendly banking was something that I had no knowledge about. I went to art school and I fell in love with it through the B Corp process. It was the first thing in the assessment that I thought, oh, that's something I, never thought about, was not in my radar at all, even though, when we founded our business, we always had a social and environmental responsibility focus. I got turned on to Bill McKibben's work. I saw that Ellie, you shared a quote from him. He's an incredible activist in this space, and I got so fired up by what I learned from his work. And I don't know if you want me to talk about how we're banking, but one of the first things on my checklist of things to do with our B Corp changes was to change our bank. And I was already with one of the US top 4 banks, largest 4 banks. And I was only with them because they bought our local bank here on the island. Mm-hmm. And I had not a great relationship with them. I didn't even really have a consistent person that I could go to. So we ended up, the first thing we did was switch our bank, and we are with Beneficial State Bank. And not only was the switch in alignment with our values, but we have received the best service with any financial institution that we've been with. I have a real banker who's a human, who I actually have her personal number, and we're buddies, and I can text her for our needs. She knows our business. She's looking out for things for us. When we went through the PPP process, it was a texting back and forth, helping us get to the front of the queue. We were one of the first businesses in my community of small businesses, including the folks I knew in New York who were trying to navigate this as well, who received our funds. It was so much easier, I think, than working with one of those top 4 banks. And I think the last thing before passing it off, Ellie covered this a little bit, but there is this concept of individual and personal responsibility in the climate movement, which I think is very powerful, that idea of using your dollars as a vote, right? And we all, I can speak from personal experience, spend a lot of time probably thinking about every little thing we purchase and how it could be in alignment with our values. What I didn't know is that concept of the individual footprint was actually invented by the marketing folks at BP. Right. It is a concept that exists so that we spin our wheels trying to decide what kind of eco underwear to buy, when we could be really changing the state of things by divesting from fossil fuels. And if your money isn't in alignment with your values, it doesn't matter what you're buying. It doesn't matter what you're selling. It's not going to move the needle if we do not divest from fossil fuels. Project Drawdown is a great resource to look at if you want science-backed information around what we need to do immediately to change the situation we're in, and it is divesting from fossil fuels. We don't do that, it doesn't matter. You need to pull your money out of these institutions. Everything you're doing with your business, it doesn't have an impact in scale with the way your money. If you have $100,000 of money sitting in your bank account right now, it's leveraged at least 10 times. It is out in the world. It is being used. If you're in one of those top 4 banks, it is being used for fossil fuels. It is being used to work on fossil fuel projects that we shouldn't even be building. That money could be used in local communities. It could be used for equity. It could be used in social projects. And it's the first thing you need to be doing if you want to be a responsible business. I'm going to pass it on. I have so much to say on this subject. Everyone should be fired up about this in their personal lives and in their businesses. And I think looking for a B Corp bank is a great way to start. Beneficial is amazing. They're moving to New York. I've already hooked up some friends in New York with them. If you need a personal contact, I'm happy to help you. We've had an amazing experience. Okay, passing it on.
No, that's awesome, Chelsea. I just want to 2 things. One, I love these backgrounds because, like, Chelsea, actually Bailey, who's on the call, who's director of impact for United by Blue, she was just up in your area at San Juan Islands doing a cleanup, which is one of the first ones they've done in like how many years, Bailey? Like 4 or 5 years, which is awesome. But yeah, beautiful part of the country. I also want to point out, like, completely unplanned. So, my place to connect with nature behind me is up in the White Mountains, up on Mount Washington. So it's actually, you can't see it, this links to the Cloud Hut, which is up towards the top of Mount Washington, and completely unplanned. Bailey has the same place,
Same background, I promise.
same
It was
background,
not
slightly different
planned.
view, which is so crazy to me. But so like, so I'll give you like my brief background. I grew up in New Hampshire, spent a lot of time in the White Mountains. With my dad for 10 years, edited the AMC White Mountain guidebook, took me on every single trail. But I spent a lot of time in the White Mountains. When we did go in the mountains, like we'd bring a water bottle, we'd stop at a stream and fill it up with clean water, and that was that. And you know, it's crazy, like you just can't do that anymore. You know, I think we've all seen certain parts of the world or areas that are dear to us either become developed or be impacted by pollution. And you know, I think one of the most important things is you know, that we talk about at United by Blue is like, you know, it's just important that people give a shit. And I think, Chelsea, what you were saying, you know, there's something like climate finance that a lot of people don't even think about. And I think I love that we're having this webinar and that is more conversation around it because it is super important. I got involved in United by Blue only about a year ago. United by Blue was founded about 12 years ago. We started in Philly with a super simple premise. It was to clean up 1 pound of trash for every item sold. And you know, over the years, we've managed to clean up 5.3 million pounds of trash, which is awesome, primarily through community cleanups. So, you know, we're not an organization that will, you know, say we clean up trash for everyone sold, and then we outsource it to a company in Indonesia. We're actually organizing cleanups. We like to say getting our hands dirty. So through community cleanups and high yield cleanups, all of which Bailey organizes and makes happen, which is awesome and brings people together and you know, has a huge impact on the environment. We, as a brand, we're a mission-driven outdoor brand. So we do bags, bottles, other products, and always trying to figure out more sustainable materials. And I think climate finance, you know, in terms of what we do, when I got involved with the company a year ago, company had been through a bit of a restructuring post-COVID. They had 3 retail stores, beautiful stores, all sustainable materials, and we're struggling to keep the numbers positive, right? And probably could have used LA services back then. Made it through COVID with the help of some government, you know, some idle loans, things like that, but just kept running short on money. And in 2022, the owners at the time and the founders of the company ended up selling the business to a much larger e-commerce company who said, okay, we're gonna invest in the business. We're gonna put $5 million in and build the business, and you guys focus on the mission and the cleanups. Within 6 months, they started having their own issues, stopped funding the company. And long story short is, you know, about a year and a half ago, I partnered with one of the founders. I spent my career in the fashion industry, building and developing brands in fashion. I've been wanting to do something more mission driven and focused on sustainability, which a lot of people talk about in the fashion industry. There's not a lot of doing or actual accomplishment there. And you know, I was super familiar with United by Blue and you know, couldn't see the mission be dropped. And so I partnered with one of the founders and a few other people to take the reins and rebuild the business basically in a much more sustainable way. We started about a year ago, or kind of restarted, and it's been a ride, right? Like, you know, I would describe it as there's a ton to do. What can go wrong will go wrong, right? As anybody who works with or owns a small business knows, right? Like January this year, we had a warehouse fire, everything got destroyed. You know, it's like, you know, we made some bad decisions on insurance. And even down to things like, you know, we try to do everything as sustainably as possible and like keep doing better, you know. So we order some new bags from this got certified factory, everything's good, they ship it and there's styrofoam packaging in it, right? And we're like, what? You know, it's like best laid plans. So it's interesting. So this whole concept of climate finance is not even something I thought about, right? Like and Chelsea, I think you raised a good point. I should have, right? Like absolutely should have. it's just not on a lot of people's radars, right? The people that are focused on let's build out a green brand and let's do sourcing right and let's help, let's use fair trade and let's do all these good things. And you're trying to do good. And in the meantime, when I took over the business, I'm like, well, I'll just open up an account at Chase because it's what I'm familiar with, right? Well, in hindsight's 2020, in retrospect, the crazy thing about Chase is the number one offender in climate finance by far, like 36% more funding of fossil fuels than Wells Fargo, which I think is the next biggest funder. So it's absolutely insane when you start to think about it, but it just wasn't a thought. And it was actually when I started going through when we started going through the B Labs the B Corp recertification process earlier this year. One of the questions is, who to use for banking, are they funding different things, et cetera. It really got us thinking about like, oh, we should absolutely look into this. So, I kind of, my process was went on the B Labs site. I'm like, okay, let's see who's B Corp certified. There's about 16 banks in the United States that are B Corp certified, including all the ones that are mentioned. And, had a few phone calls with people, and I really connected with the banker from Climate First, woman named Lauren Duvay, and we made the switch to Climate First. And I think, I would just echo what Chelsea said. It's been an amazing experience so far, coming from Chase, where yes, I had an account rep who didn't know me, honestly didn't give a shit about me, would email me once in a while, hey, anything we can do for you, aka can we sell you more services, right? Which I hate those outreach. It's like, what can we do for you? And it's like, you anyhow, to somebody who's like, hey, let's organize cleanups together. I think Bailey Lauren came to the cleanup in B Labs Atlanta, right? BLD Southeast. So there's like people that are super collaborative, super helpful. And it's been just an amazing experience. I think if, everything I've heard, the biggest obstacle to companies switching to climate focused bank or an environmentally focused bank is the pain of switching, and also the fear that you're not going to have the same services. And Doug, I hear you on the ACHs, right? Climate First, their back end is not as good as Chase's. And I'm sure for international transactions, there's some limitations at Climate First. But I will say from a banking relationship, right? If an ACH doesn't go through, you call Wanda at Climate First, she picks up the phone, she makes it happen like then and there. And that's been my experience versus I actually had the opposite experience with Chase, where people think it's easy. When I set up the account, they gave me an 800 number to call. I had to call that. I went through so many hoops on setting up Chase. We had our account hacked into and somebody stole all of our points, which is weird. That took me probably 10 hours on the phone dealing with that. So my experience with Climate First has been exactly the opposite. And I think, so that's one thing I would share about our experience, that it's been honestly like a real pleasure, and knowing what I know now is super important. Number two, at least in my experience, we didn't completely abandon Chase, right? Maybe we should, but for services like international wire transfers, things like that, I still have a Chase account open with a little bit of money in it, right? But most of our money, our operating money, is at Climate First. So, and I think, back to the point I think Ellie raised on one of the slides, if 90% of a bank's money is going to lending, right? They're using all that cash that you're holding with them to make those loans and take that action. So I think, as long as we're putting most of our money, if we're concerned about, being able to send ACHs and running our business, because, it's hard enough to run a small business, you can do both. And I think I would just share that, like, you don't have to go, full turkey. But it's been an absolute pleasure making the change. And, just one more big thing that we can do as a company, to make a positive impact on the environment. And I think, like Chelsea said, you do everything else, which, not to take away from everything else we all do, right? Like, the cleanups I think are super impactful, get a lot of people involved. show people that, you know, they can make a huge difference in just 2 hours on a Saturday or Sunday. But you know, I think it's these things that are a little less obvious that have massive impacts, that as business owners, we can all make a huge impact on the environment, kind of outsized from our actual businesses.
I will say that the Philly cleanup, I mean, you guys got 100 people. It was just really nice to be around other people who cared. And, you know, from, I think, yeah, there were some really interesting things, but it was like 2,000 pounds of garbage out of the Philly parks.
In 2 hours,
Yeah,
which is,
less than
you
2
know,
hours.
nuts.
Yeah, it was awesome. And
So
it helped to like clear up that area. And I've heard from our partners that that's actually helped to stop illegal dumping in that area. So not only did it happen that one time, but there's been a long lasting effect because we're able to clean it up and really make an impact. People haven't dumped there anymore because they know they're not supposed to. So it's nice to hear the long-term effects as well.
yeah, it's nice to have those community connections, but also the systemic foundations to change those. And I think that was really the aha, like the light bulb in my mind. I'm like, how did I not see this before, right? And I'd like to think of myself as an aware consumer. So these types of conversations really bring it to light. Chelsea, did you have any, you know, obstacles or any, you know, yeah, any obstacles in your switch?
Yeah, first I just want to say, as an ocean person, someone who lives on an island, we have an island cleanup of our beaches every year. It happened last weekend where we divide up the shoreline. We're out in nature, we're having conversations, and also it raises your awareness about, these are the materials I keep finding on my beach. These kind of things that, you know, when you're picking them up as they're degraded, it helps you think about, what is the life cycle of these materials that we use every day? Do I need that thing at all? I love that about the cleanup. It's so much more than just picking trash off the beach. It's changing our relationship with material goods and how we see their life cycle over time. So just that. And then what was your question? Oh, no, I had no issues changing. I had no person at Chase. It was the 1-800 number or whatever. And this was like right, I don't know, before COVID. And so it was worse as, you know, there was no branch even to go in. And we built this new relationship with the beneficial banker. I think the only fee that we incurred was printing new checks. We actually reduced our fees because as a B Corp, they consider us change makers within their structure. And so there were no fees for change makers, for people doing, you know, positive work in the world. It, you know, for me at my scale, I don't know for everyone, but we have no banking fees at all. We have ACH, we have QB, you know, it all links into our QuickBooks. All of the payments that we receive as a business are ACH. That's our payment. We prefer. We have no issues with that. They have community meetups and things. We go and do things with our banker, like with our whole B Corp community and with our banker. So I know her children. You know, it's a whole thing, and it's just a very different human relationship. And at the end of the day, you know, that is super valuable. It's super valuable to have a human that you feel comfortable with. And that was one thing I wanted to bring up, because this year we also partnered with Premiums for the Planet and moved our insurance over. We had a relationship with our insurance provider that was human to human and was positive, but that broke with the broker. But that broker, you know, wasn't necessarily in alignment with our values. It was just a person who was a good human that we liked working with. And so sometimes that breakup can be really hard. If you do have a positive relationship with your banker and you want to move somewhere else, or your insurance provider, or your 401k, you know, your retirement provider, it could be a relationship that's positive that you've had over years. Ours is 10, 12 years. Premiums for the Planet helped us with a kind of like a breakup letter that was really positive. It really took that friction out, because that can be really hard, that idea of like severing a relationship when they haven't done anything necessarily wrong in the service they're providing. It's just that you want to be in alignment with your values, and you're making this change for a larger ideal, right? So they helped us in how you tell someone that it's not you, it's me. You know, I just have I have these values and I need to be moving in that direction. So thinking about some of that friction and how you can move around it with grace is really helpful. And if you have a banker and you need to, you know, let them know why you're making the change, let them know why you're making the change. Maybe they don't know, you know, maybe they don't know that these things are an issue. Maybe they want to make a change from their bank to another institution as well. Maybe they want to read something from Bill McKibben. I don't know.
Mhm.
So that kind of human conversation, there can be friction there, but those are conversations we have to have.
I just want to, I had one issue transferring money from Chase to Climate First, and that was the first time the Chase banker actually called me, on the phone, right? The first time he cared was when I went to move all the money out, and he's like, "Oh, is everything okay?" I'm like, "No, everything's good, just transferring money," and that was it. So it was the first time he cared was when I took away the business. So I think, but I think that speaks to like, sometimes, I went to a Climate Week event earlier this week. One of the takeaways is like sometimes these initiatives, when you look at climate impact and everything going on, right? You look at Chase Bank spending trillions of dollars on fossil fuels, right? And financing fossil fuels and exploration, things like that. Sometimes it can seem overwhelming, right? And that like it's hard to make a difference. What does my money matter to Chase, right? In the scheme of things, compared to the trillions of dollars they get and the impact that some of these big businesses. But I would say, you do see when word gets around and a lot of small businesses start moving away, they do take notice, right? Banks do take notice, and they do, like they might not stop lending to fossil fuel industries, but they might establish a climate, initiative where they can make a bigger impact. So, to me, like I truly believe that, not just because of optimism, right? Like I've seen it happen in my lifetime and career. So, I do think that's important that the more the word gets out, the more education gets out about climate finance, and like this webinar and other initiatives. I think it makes a big impact. I know there's a question in the chat about loans. I can't speak to loans, right? I can't speak to Climate First. I know they do a lot of lending for solar projects, but I can't speak to loans for small businesses. Hopefully, I know a lot of these small mission-driven banks are looking to do more with small businesses, looking to expand lending, but I can't speak to any personal experience with that. But from a community standpoint, from a network standpoint, right, as small business owners, it's super important who's in our network, right? And so I agree with Chelsea. Like we didn't make the switch that long ago, probably a couple months ago, but Lauren and my relationship with Climate First, she's been amazing just as a connector. She connected us to the B Labs event in Atlanta, the BLD Southeast, right? Where, there's a lot of people active there and a lot of a great network of people that we can collaborate with and do things with as a business. So that can be a huge benefit, just, having that personal relationship, but also, opening up a network of like-minded businesses and people who care, right? People who give a shit. And everybody has a connection with the environment, places that are dear to them. And like a lot of people care, but it might be overwhelming. It might be, again, the more we can expand the network, create awareness, share experiences, that it was an easy switch, and I'm super grateful every day for that switch. I think that's important.
Just going to add also with the lending, I can't speak for all of the banks, but our bank, Beneficial, it's part of their mission to be lending to women-owned businesses, to BIPOC businesses, to businesses in rural environments and in urban environments, to businesses of a certain scale, to businesses doing community work, to nonprofits. It's part of their mission. They want to find you and help you with your organization. So it's a whole different kind of relationship and ecosystem. And we've had no issue with, getting loans through them because of this.
I will add one thing about the loan, just with my, SBA loan underwriting experience hat on. if you think about it, banks, no matter what the bank is, they have to keep a relatively risk-free portfolio, right? And there are certain boxes like collateral, credit scores that you do have to fit. And when you don't fit that, you go to the SBA or the community development side, which is a fantastic complement anyway for small businesses, because most small businesses can't go to any bank and get a sufficient amount of financing that you need to really capitalize your business well. And that is where those community lending counterparts come into play. So even if you couldn't go to Amalgamated, you could go to a non-depository bank, a CDFI, to get that financing, that are also there for you. And they're required by their certification to make 60% of their loan portfolio towards whatever that mission is that they have, that are almost always social. And they're regulated, they're monitored for that. So I would say for loans, non-depository relationships, CDFIs, those kinds of institutions are still probably a good bet for, many business owners, unless you're like, over 5 million, perhaps you could start going the more conventional route. But there's still special underwriting considerations. And most of these banks, from what I understand, at least the bigger ones, have Spring Bank, which is even a small one up in the Bronx, they have that SBA designation. Most people do. I want to just add one more thing that was interesting, just to highlight what you said, Chelsea, about the relationships that you have with people. An easy relationship to change is one that's transactional, that you don't have it and it's just. But one thing that I learned in our climate finance cohort was, if there is a deeper relationship, have that conversation with them. Is there some way, what climate friendly options or socially responsible options are there that we have, without moving from the institution? Where else can we funnel our money into a different product or a different type of index fund? And there are green funds out there. Well, I know personally with a personal wealth advisor, I'm always asking, like, every time he mentions a company, I'm like, who's this company in Texas? Like, what do they do? And I want him to know that this is important to me. And he's saying that people are asking him about it. It makes me feel good that I am being pushy. One other thing that I noted to mention is, we didn't really talk about this. Chelsea had introduced it. Premiums for the Planet is a climate friendly insurance broker. I'm hoping I'm representing specifically what they do well, and perhaps Chelsea, you can correct me or clarify. We did go to an event this week where there was a representative there, and she had mentioned that if you can't change your insurance, because insurance is sometimes difficult, what they can do is plug. Premiums for the Planet has like a data system that can plug into their insurance policy. Like, the policy owner gives permission to transmit data, and they aggregate that data between, type of business, industry, and are able to use that data to create, the information, to push the information upstream, to start creating this like upstream pressure, and let people know more and more people want this kind of insurance product. And if you think about it, those of us, we are less of a risk when it comes to insurance. Eco-friendly businesses are less risky. We should have the more cost competitive premiums. And I have a feeling we're probably making up for a lot of the risky ones, right? So that's the cool thing about Premiums for the Planet, is if they can't directly insure, they can at least plug into your, like, grab your information, and you could be part of that system to support.
Our transition with premiums to Premiums for the Planet, we actually didn't change our insurance carrier or our policy in any way. We just changed our broker, and that was a form letter and a couple of emails. It was really, really smooth. Unfortunately, they don't do personal insurance. It's only business insurance, but it was a really easy transition. And they're deeply connected. That's the other thing. If this is your world and something you care about, they're incredible resources. And already I've reached out to them for some intros to different folks, because they're out in the community doing the work. They want to talk about what you're doing. They want to help connect you out in this community. So it's just another relationship thing as well that I've found already to be really valuable. Part two, just on the retirement and investments funds. I don't know how many of you all have retirement funds for your business. We have a simple IRA. So it's not a 401k, but because we're a really tiny business, one of the things I'm going to drop in the chat, if you all don't have the organization As We Sow on your list, you can drop the names of your investment funds into this. They have like a filter where you can check your personal investment, all the funds that you're in, and see, how invested in fossil fuels am I? How invested in weapons am I? How invested in deforestation am I? You can drop the ticker symbol off of your funds from whatever ways you're investing, personally or from your business. It's very enlightening. And once you see that information, you can't unsee it. And you will be on a path to change once you get that grade level D, F on your funds. And so we moved our simple IRA from Vanguard to Fidelity. And we worked with, let's see, I'm going to put this in the chat too. We worked with the folks at Green Retirement who advised us on a couple of funds to put our simple IRA in. And it was pretty seamless. You can do the same thing by using that other link that I put in. If you want to do it DIY, you can see what, again, I'm not a financial advisor, but you want to be looking at, okay, the returns. You also want to be looking at the fees. I'm sure Ellie can help you with this too. And then you want to be looking at what you're invested in. You can totally do this on your own. You don't need it. You don't need, or with Ellie. And I really encourage you because it's empowering. That money is sitting there and every year it's being reinvested every year. And that money sitting in those retirement funds could be larger than the money sitting in your banking accounts, right? Especially over time. So for sure, drop some of those into that link and see where you are invested.
I'll just kind of share with you guys. I'm glad you jogged my memory here because I remember going through this and I was like, that funds the prison like industrial complex. And for some reason, it just was such a wow moment for me. And that's the other thing that I really appreciate about this climate movement is that it's an umbrella for so many other social causes that can really bring folks together and really move the needle. But this is another one, actually. It's fossil-free funds. I believe, oh yeah, how did I do that? Yeah, they kind of go through the rating here, and I believe they also, right.
It's the same.
It's
It's all under As We Sow. So this is part of As We Sow.
Oh, okay, got it. Kind of aligning our money with our values. It's something that I think is important to look at more and more these days, and just being part of that conversation. And hopefully we can take some next steps in terms of where this goes from here. Maybe we do another class, or maybe do something in person, or it would be great to hear, like, if you guys do make a change, I'd absolutely love to hear. 1, 2, if you need any help, absolutely would love to hear. Right. So just let us know, keep us posted. And if there's anything that we could do in collaboration with other organizations out there to really amplify the message, that would be most welcome.
Something like for the group to think about, maybe come back to Ellie if you have ideas. I know the topic, right? How do you speak about this in a way that gets people interested, engaged, thinking about it, right? Not shaming people, right? Like I was with Chase, I had no idea, right? Like how do you raise the topic in a way that's engaging and gets people to show up? I think is my question to think about, because like I said, it doesn't come across when you initially hear it as the sexiest topic, but super, super important topic.
Yeah, I second that. There's an aversion to this subject. How do we change this narrative? There are powerful forces that don't want this information out, right? It is overwhelming. It can seem overwhelming. So I'm kind of on a mission to spread the word. And I think if you can talk to folks in your community and just try to find a way to fire people up around this, it is empowering work. It really does move the needle in a way that's much more profound than a lot of the other things that we spend a lot of time focusing on.
Yeah, love it. Thank you everybody so much for being here. I just feel all this collective energy, and it feels really good knowing that these conversations are happening and we're aware and we're starting to move the needle towards a more positive environment, social society, and just working with integrity with each other. Thanks to Chelsea and Seth again for sharing your insights and your journey.